Chess YouTube, we have breaking news. Magnus Carlsen just invented a brand new chess opening, and this new opening by the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen, is going to blow your mind, I guarantee it. I mean, Hikaru was just speechless by this new idea by Magnus. All right, in the game, Magnus opening 1g4, the Grob opening. And by the way, this game just took place this month on the chess.com servers during a blitz game. Now here, Hikaru, not to be outdone, I mean, when Magnus opens 1g4 like this, the Grob opening, he's sort of flirting with Hikaru. He's saying, Hikaru, what you got? You gonna play along? You gonna play this BS opening game with me? And Hikaru says, two can tango, g5, we have the double Grob opening. Now, the double Grob is actually an official opening according to chess.com, but it gets weirder than this. Here, Magnus, d4. Okay, going for a normal game, it seems. Hikaru Nakamura, no problem, d5. And on move 3, Magnus Carlsen busts out his new opening idea. That is the move h4, the AlphaZero move. Here we go. And what should I call this? I'm going to call it the, let's see, Norwegian Salamander. The Norwegian Salamander has been born. And by the way, this game was played, this move right here was played once in a correspondence game, but never over the board. Therefore, this is a brand new chess opening. All right, now, of course, what is going on? Well, the g5 pawn is hanging two different ways, as is the g4 pawn. So Hikaru says, you know what? We're going to capture on g4. Bishop takes the g4 pawn. And now what is Magnus going to do? Well, he doesn't capture with the bishop. Instead, he takes on g5 with the pawn. This is the idea right here, the AlphaZero idea. Now, the rook on the h1 square has full scope on the h-file, and if black ever castles on the king side, then white's going to have a ready-made attack on h7, and black is going to be in deep trouble. So, if black can't castle on the king side, where is his king going to go? That is going to be the big problem right here for black. Now, Hikaru on move 4, he's already flustered by the new opening, the Norwegian Salamander, and he plays this move, bishop f5. Now, you don't need to be a very stable chess genius to know why this move right here isn't very good. And the reason why is this bishop on g4 was already developed. Now, Hikaru wasting a move going bishop to f5, and the bishop really isn't that much better placed on f5 over g4. It's not doing that much else to help his position. And Hikaru could have developed with, say, I don't know, c5, knight c6, e6, and so on, instead seemingly wasting a move right here. All right, now Magnus, c4, in the spirit of the Queen's Gambit opening, a very solid idea. And now Hikaru plays a move reminiscent of the Shigorin variation of the Queen's Gambit. That is the move knight to c6. Now, I do want to point out, when black has the bishop on f5 like this, the move knight c6 actually makes some sense. After all, black now is threatening knight b4, and then the fork on c2, hitting the king on e1 and the rook on the a1 square. So that is sort of the idea of having, in these 1d4, d5 openings, the knight on c6 and the bishop on f5. Now, the drawback of this move, knight c6, is in these Queen's Gambit openings, black typically wants to have the c-pawn either on c6 or potentially going to c5 later in the opening. And of course, that is not possible right now with the knight blocking the c-pawn. So that is why this move is a little bit risky, shall we say. All right, now Magnus, knight c3, playing classical chess. Black goes e6, a solid move. Of course, the benefit of this is now the dark squared bishop has scope on this diagonal. It can go to, say, e6, or e7, d6, or b4 like this. Now here, Magnus makes a very interesting strategic decision. Right here, he can do kind of whatever he wants. He can develop with, say, knight f3, or bishop f4, or bishop to g2 or h3. He can go queen to a4. He can take on d5. I mean, white can kind of do whatever he wants right here in this weird Norwegian Salamander new opening. But what Magnus does is he goes for the Carlsbad pawn structure with the move c takes d5. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry. I'm going to explain it right now. The Carlsbad is in these Queen's Gambit structures where white takes on d5 like this, and black takes back with the pawn like this. And now white does not have the c-pawn, and black does not have the e-pawn. Now, other than the king side being an absolute mess right here, this is a very typical looking Carlsbad pawn structure. Now, if you know anything about the Carlsbad, White's main idea is to bring this bishop outside the pawn chain and then go e3. If he can do that, he will have very good chances for an edge, but if he cannot do that, then he actually may end up a little bit worse if things don't go well. Now here, not surprisingly, the best move for White is actually just developing this bishop to f4, again, getting it outside the pawn chain. But instead, Magnus here making a completely different kind of move. He goes bishop to h3, challenging this bishop on f5. All right, what is Hikaru going to do? Well, the best move here for black is queen d7, supporting the bishop. That way, if white takes, black takes back, and then the queen is very well placed on the f5 square. Now, instead here, black goes bishop to g6, and this move is a little bit slow, and beyond that, white's bishop on h3 is now tremendously active, slicing down this diagonal. So things are just really not going Hikaru's way so far in this brand new chess opening. All right, now Magnus, knight f3, and Hikaru goes knight to b4. Of course, this was perhaps the key idea behind bishop g6, trying to keep this bishop still on this diagonal, controlling c2, and therefore setting up knight to c2 ideas. But here, Magnus, he just goes king to f1, sliding his king over. And why does this move work so well right here? Well, typically, when you go for the alpha 0 attack with h4, and perhaps even h5, h6, and so on, the king very often doesn't castle. Instead, it very often just slides over to the f1 square like this. Magnus does this all the time in his own chess games, and the idea is the king is decently placed on f1. Now, normally, the problem with going king f1 is, of course, the rook on the h1 square would not be active at all. However, when you push the h-pawn like this and open up the h-file, suddenly the rook is still very active on h1 or perhaps g1 or perhaps even h3 or h4 later in the game. So this actually works out quite well here for white. All right, now black, c6 is the move, bolstering that d5 pawn, a very typical idea in this Carlsbad pawn structure. Now white goes knight to e5, jumping in with the knight and pressuring this bishop. Very good. And beyond that, very importantly, white here is threatening bishop to d7, hitting the king. And obviously, black would not want to capture the bishop with the queen like this. That would be just a terrible, terrible idea. Therefore, black is going to have to move his king. And once you go, for example, bishop d7, king to e7, that is just not a good outcome for black at all. That would be very, very, very bad. All right, so here, Hikaru, what does he do? He goes bishop to d6. I think the idea is if white does go bishop to d7, then black intends king to f8, and from there you are threatening this knight, and therefore you are threatening to remove the defender of the bishop. So, very interesting idea. Now, again, bishop f4 is perhaps the right idea for white, but instead here, Magnus, he takes on g6. We have knight takes on g6, and then black takes back with the f-pawn, f takes. And now we have the move a3, driving back the knight. Knight to a6 is forced. There's literally nowhere else for the knight to go. I mean, all of these squares are being covered, and obviously c6 and d5 are taken by the pawns, so knight a6 is the only good move here for black. And now Magnus finds the key idea in this position, and he just lights the board on fire with this very, very thematic idea in the Carlsbad pawn structure. He plays the move e4. And look at this. From here, white is threatening potentially taking on d5, also potentially e5, pushing back the bishop and getting a crushing space advantage. And from there, white could threaten, for example, f4, f5, and so on, and white would be getting a massive attack. And beyond that, having the king on f1 here, I mean, it's actually not the worst place for the king. I mean, where else would the king want to be right now? It looks safer there than on g1 to me personally. So, very strong move by Magnus here. All right, Hikaru, king to f8, sliding his king away from the center. And now Magnus takes on d5. E takes d5 is the move. And now Hikaru takes another move and gets his king to the g7 square. A very interesting idea. So, king g7 is played in the game. And now Magnus just takes on the c6. D takes c6. And look at this. Magnus is just completely dominating the board with this brand new chess opening, the Norwegian Salamander. And Hikaru just, I mean, he's just getting simply eviscerated in this game right here. All right, black takes on c6, b takes c6, and then white goes queen to f3, threatening the pawn, but beyond that, cutting off the king on the f file. That is super, super important. Now the king on g7 does not have access to these squares. Of course, f6 was covered by the pawn, but now white is especially covered by the queen as well. So the attack here is just getting stronger and stronger. And for example, one idea might be bishop to e6 and then queen to f7, among other ideas. White has so many ideas here. All right, black, knight to c7, trying to defend. Then knight to e4. Magnus here, he ignores the free pawn on c6. He knows the attack against the black king is more important, and therefore he brings yet another piece into the attack. The most important rule in attacking chess, well, the second most important one. The most important one is push the h-pawn. The second most important rule is bring all of the pieces into the attack. All right, black, knight d5, trying to centralize, trying to defend, a decent idea. But Magnus here, sure enough, bishop to e6, threatening checkmate in one move. And it may look simple. Obviously, white's threatening checkmate, but it's actually not that easy to find a good defensive setup against this move right here. So, what is black supposed to do? He goes queen to f8. Hikaru trying to trade queens. And Magnus says, no problem. Queen takes, and then bishop takes. And from here, Magnus takes on d5 like this. Bishop takes, c takes, and then simply, I mean, this move is just, this is like the icing on the cake, the cherry on the ice cream sundae. Bishop to f4. Look at this move right here. The brilliant move on top of the brand new chess opening. I mean, white's idea, if you take the knight, bishop to e5 hits the king. If the king moves, you lose the rook. And if you block the attack with the knight, white just takes and then takes the rook. I mean, talk about brutal stuff here. So white, ignoring the knight in order to bring yet another piece into the attack with tempo. Fantastic stuff. All right, here, Hikaru. Rook to e8. The idea being if white goes bishop e5, then black takes here, white takes, and black takes again and wins material, as after all, these two minor pieces are worth more than the rook. So a good defensive move, but keep in mind, Hikaru here, down to just 7 seconds on the clock in this brand new chess opening, the Norwegian Salamander. Things are not looking good for Hikaru. All right, Magnus here. For some reason, the computer finds the best move here to be knight d6, but for the life of me, I really can't figure out the idea behind this move. Yes, you hit the rook, but beyond that, I cannot figure it out. If you know why knight d6 is the move right here, drop a comment down below. Let me know what the idea is. I would love to know because that one really stumped me. Instead, Magnus played the much more human-looking move, the much simpler option, just knight c3. Dropping back and pressuring the pawn on d5. That one makes a lot more sense to me, but what do I know? All right, black, king to f7. Trying to centralize his king. White takes on d5, and black goes rook d8, pressuring the knight and pressuring the pawn behind the knight. All right, now white, knight c3. White retreats. And now, of course, this pawn is hanging, but instead of capturing it, obviously, if black does, then bishop to e5 would fork the rook and the rook. You can't do that. So instead, Hikaru, he sees this. Bishop to g7 is the move right here. Now white, knight b5, jumping up, defending, and attacking, a very typical Magnus Carlsen style move. Now black, knight to e7, a good move, trying to bring the last pieces into the attack. I mean, look at this. We're on move 26, and black still has not gotten the kingside pieces into the game. That's just Magnus Carlsen's magic right there for you. All right, knight e7, knight d6, hits the king. The knight is also defended by the bishop, therefore black cannot take on d6. So the king right here, it must go somewhere. Where does it go? King to g8 is the move. Now white, rook to e1, activating yet another piece on the open e file. All right, black, knight to d5 is the move. And now Magnus, bishop to e5. The point being, if you take the bishop, white takes back with the pawn, and then the pawn would defend the knight, and white would be doing outstanding here. All right, black, trying to get some kind of counterplay. He plays the alpha zero move h5 in return, but here Magnus gets the born-again alpha zero pawn on the h file with g takes h6, the en passant move, getting the born-again alpha zero pawn. All right, we trade some rooks here. Rook takes, bishop takes, king to e2, and here Magnus finds himself in the endgame where he is simply up 2 pawns against Hikaru. Look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns is more than 2 if my math is correct. And Magnus here, I mean, this guy is the GOAT of endgames for a reason, but keep in mind, Magnus is down to 20 seconds versus the 5 of Hikaru. Hikaru's sort of fighting back in time pressure here. Let's see what happens. Hikaru, a5, gaining space on the queen side. King d3, marching the king up the board. Rook b8, targeting the pawn on b2. So far, so good. Knight c4, defends that pawn. A logical move by the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. Now, rook b3 hits the king on the d3 square. King to e4, and then knight to e7. The knight drops back. Now, white, d5. Of course, Magnus knows pass pawns must be pushed. You simply must push your pass pawns as soon as possible. That really is the essence of the endgame in chess. Now, knight f5, guarding the d6 square potentially, but Magnus d6 anyway. Now, king f7, and then d7 again. Magnus understanding that pass pawns must be pushed. All right. Bishop g5, defending d8, a very good move. Now rook d1, threatening d8, promoting to a queen. Black, of course, has to block the attack. Bishop to d8, and now both players down to less than 10 seconds. Literally anything could happen here. All right, king d5 is the move. Magnus, his idea, maybe king to c6, and from there trying to pressure the bishop somehow, although it won't be easy as the rook does control the b file, and therefore king to b7 would not be possible yet. All right, black, king to e7, threatening the pawn. We have king to c6, king to e6, and then bishop c3, dropping back, and of course, pressuring the very vulnerable pawn on a5. What should black do? Well, I'll tell you, Hikaru, knight to e7 is the move, hitting the king. Then we have king c5, and then a4, trying to clamp down on the queen side and trying to make the pawn just that much less vulnerable here. All right, rook d6 is the move, hits the king. King to f7, bishop to a5, offering the trade of bishops. Keep in mind, if this bishop falls, then this pawn on d7 is going to have just free reign to promote, and that is going to be effectively game over on the spot. All right, black, rook b8, defends. Now we have bishop takes, rook takes, knight e5, hits the king, king g7, and finally, the last move of the game, knight to c6. And in this position, Hikaru Nakamura, he resigns on the spot to Magnus Carlsen and his brand new chess opening, the Norwegian Salamander. And the idea is, no matter what black does right here, white is going to push this pawn through. For example, if black trades on c6, the king takes, then king to c7, and then d8 is promoting to a queen. For example, knight takes, king takes, and sooner or later, after any move, the king goes to c7 and then promotes to a queen, and white is just completely winning here. So Hikaru resigning in a very understandable position. There was simply no way to save the game. Wow, what a chess game between Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT, and Hikaru Nakamura. I mean, these guys are just playing the craziest chess games nonstop, including in these absolutely insane new openings like this one right here, starting with the double grob and transitioning to the Norwegian Salamander. Very, very interesting stuff. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and comment down below what you thought of this game. I hope you liked it. You know, there's nothing like a Dr. Mike Chess new opening video, I tell you what. And anyways, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.